Games Workshop very kindly sent me the brand new Exalted 8-bound kit for the World Eaters for Warhammer 40k. And I'm a massive fan of this kit. I think they are super cool. I think they look amazing. But they've definitely been very divisive in the community. Some people love them, some people hate them. And that happens for a lot of Warhammer releases, or a lot of releases by Games Workshop. And in my opinion, there's only one thing more divisive than Warhammer, and that's anime. And something about these screams anime to me. The new 8-bound kit is full of parts for customization. It's 3 models, but 2 sprues packed full of detail. But there's one bit that really caught my attention, and it's this mother frickin' chainsaw. And I've got a feeling I know where the inspiration from that is from. And this bit is going to be the linchpin of this entire kit bash. I started out building the 8-bound as per the instructions, but his other arm was a big chain axe, and I wanted to convert it because the chain fist didn't look quite right. So I opted to use the circular saw. I could have converted this to a proper chainsaw probably, but the circular saw looks cool enough. I think it's cool. So after sizing them both up, I realized that I could chop the hand off the circular saw and the hand off the chain axe and swap them over. This literally took no green stuff whatsoever. It was just chopping it in the right place, slicing it down until it fit, using my knife, and then just gluing them together. It was really easy to do. So after I put the arms on it, it was time to start working on the head. Now, I'm not a sculptor. I'm not a green stuff mastermind. So I started out with this head from the new Jackal kit, and it comes with a solid metal faceplate, and I thought that'll be perfect to put over the original face. So I chopped the head out and then started filing it down using a round file. Whilst I was doing this, I was like filing it, and I had the head I was going to be sticking it to near me, so I could kind of like see if it fit, if I'd had too much plastic in one place, if I needed to file it down anymore. And then once I was happy with it, I chopped the nose off the 8-bound just so the faceplate would fit better, and then I glued it in place. And then I glued the head to the body as well. And it's starting to really come together. But it wouldn't be Chainsaw Man without a chainsaw face. I found this chainsaw also from the Jackhals kit, just because they're a little bit smaller. The Jackhals kit seems to be the only New World Eaters kit that didn't sell out. Like I did. Are you ready to enter a world of fantasy and adventure? Then get ready for Bloodline Heroes of Lythus. This is a fantasy RPG with visually stunning 3D realistic graphics available on mobile devices. It's time to collect and customize your own champion bloodline. With this game's unique gacha gameplay, the hybrid system, you can collect new fantasy characters with sleek designs every fortnight. You can also customize your champions by marrying any 2 bloodlines in the game, creating over 800 fantasy hybrids. Join their family tree to create unique appearances as the hybrids inherit their talents and traits as their bloodlines become one. You can join the guild war on brand new maps and conquer territories with your guild members. Claim rewards and create the most unique hybrid champions called Bloodcraft Legends. But that's not all. You can also raise heirs with companions or even waifus. Build your own kingdom and economy with strategic gameplay, with beautiful scenes and interesting storylines you won't want to stop playing. So what are you waiting for? You can download the game free on Android and iOS. You can use my link in the description or scan the QR code to get started. And for a limited time, you can get a special starter pack worth $20. You'll receive 1 summoning crystal, 100,000 gold, and 100 diamonds just for signing up with my link. But wait, for the next 7 days, the first 20 players who leave their in-game account ID and username in this comment section below will receive a free legendary female orc champion, Ugrul, one of the best warriors to carry you in the game. So don't miss out on the action and join the world of Bloodline Heroes of Lythus today. Anyway, back to Chainsaw Man. I ended up chopping off the hand and then slicing the details off so I could use them later, and essentially just like chopping away until it fit on the faceplate. I ended up chopping the little spikes off the faceplate as well because it meant the chainsaw wouldn't fit. So essentially rounded it out until I had a nice fit on the face. And then what I did was, once I glued it on, I took the details I sliced off, like the little exhaust, and then just glued that back on because it because of plastic glue, it fuses it together and makes it look like one piece. Next up, I mixed up some green stuff. You've seen all this before. I'm gonna have to do a bit of sculpting and rolled out these really long, tiny little sausages. And this was to make the chainsaw handle on Chainsaw Man's head. So I found something that was like a similar size to his head and used that as like a guide. So this is the end of a sanding stick. And then once I was happy with the shape, I made another one for the back of the neck because he's obviously got 2. I'll let those dry a little bit just so they'd be less malleable when I wanted to glue them on, essentially. But I also realized I might have used the wrong head. This head is now perfect. So I end up filling the gap. But once I'd let them dry, I took the handles, chopped them down to size, and then smoothed them out onto the green stuff that I'd just placed to fill the gap, which actually worked perfectly to basically adhere them together. And then I did the same for the back of the neck as well. And then once the green stuff was on, we were happy to start putting the rest of the model together. But it wouldn't be Chainsaw Man without one tiny detail, so I very precariously hand sculpted a little pull cord for his chest. After a snappy priming transition, it was time for paint. Starting out with a grey primer, I then zenithal highlighted. I got that wrong in the previous video. I zenithal highlighted using my airbrush and white ink, and then add a bit of white paint as well, just to make them adhere together. And then I covered the entire model in a gloss varnish, because this would really protect the white ink, which is very fragile and can reactivate very easily. And it also makes washes and contrast flow way better than you could do without it. So then I mixed up some Apothecary white contrast paint with some airbrush thinner, and I slapped this all over the model to add some depth and shade into the white armor. I'm going to go for a classic World Eaters theme, because I think that closely matches Denji's white Demon Hunter outfit, but also it's a World Eater at the end of the day. I also used some really thin Nuln Oil to add some deeper recesses where I didn't want it to look like a blue-grey. I wanted it to look like more of a dark black recess, just to really push the contrast. After it fully dried, I took a dry brush with pure white and dry brushed it all over the model to highlight all of the armor without having to actually do any real highlighting. And as you can see, this white armor looks amazing. I think it's the best way to paint white armor in my opinion. The contrast paint adds a gradient over the flat parts and into the recesses as well and deepens them. And then the white highlight just brings out all the edges again. And I think it looks mint. I don't know about you. At this point, it becomes a little bit paint by numbers style, so I paint all the trim with a Brass by Pro Acryl, which is probably the longest part of this painting process, because the World Eaters come with a lot of trim. And because all the other details that aren't the white armor have had like a zenithal and a dry brush, then it's perfect for contrast, so I use Guilliman flesh for all the fleshy parts of the model. So I block those out, and sticking with contrast, I use a contrast to paint the shoulder pad and the blue parts to make him look like a World Eater. At this point, I actually hate it because this contrast paint is way too bright to my liking. So I ended up mixing it with black and Draconov Nightshade to make a much darker, less saturated blue, which is more in tune with the World Eaters. I then give the flesh another coat of Guilliman flesh to make it a stronger, deeper color, because this is possessed flesh. It's not normal human skin. The one thing I do that you might not have done before is I'm reverse highlighting, not just adding contrast to highlight. So overall of the brush trim, I'm putting a very heavy but selective wash of Agrax shade. Because of these new washes act much more like a contrast paint, so they tend to pull together very easily. So by applying the wash down the center of all of the trim on this miniature, it pulls away from the edges. And what it essentially does is it makes it look like we've highlighted all of the trim, where we've actually only washed it. And by washing it down the center, we've just created a highlight, which is a much easier way to do highlights because you don't do them. But it adds so much depth to the trim without having a need to highlight, but it looks like it's already been highlighted, which is great. I then, again, paint by numbers, wash and highlight the other metallics as normal, using a Nuln Oil wash and a bright silver. For the parts that I've just used contrast, such as the blue, the bone, and the flesh, I take the contrast paint and add a little bit of normal acrylic paint to it. So in this case, I think I added Cantor Blue. And essentially what I'm doing is, because the contrast paint doesn't sit flat on these parts because it's not as detailed as the original white armor, I use it to base and layer the miniature. But obviously, because the blue contrast is already there, the base layer can just be like one coat. It's really easy to do. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm neatening up all of the armor panels to make them look flat and sharp rather than like patchy due to the contrast. So I end up just adding a raw color, like a normal Citadel paint, like a base paint. Again, in this example, I'm adding Cantor Blue, and then just adding a little bit of white and going over it again in sharper highlights. So I am doing some traditional highlighting on this shoulder pad and on the backpack, only on this part just because it doesn't look right. And then I do the same for the skull. So here I'm just going over with some Shabty Bone just to highlight the edges because it doesn't look quite right. It's like, the thing is with contrast, it's like always 90% there and you can always build on it to make it look way better. So then I'm using some Ushabti Bone and then adding some white and doing some more extreme highlights. And this is like my go-to way to paint. It's like Slap Chop Extreme. It's like Slap Chop 2. Dry brush it, put some contrast on, and then add some layers afterwards. By doing this gradual gradient of adding a little bit of a brighter color, adding a bit more of a white, you get really, really smooth highlights that look really natural. And again, same again, skin. I'm going in with the Kislev flesh mixed in with some Guilliman flesh to tie those two colors together, but adding some highlights and making it look way, just way better in my opinion. For the final part of the paint job, it was time to tackle that faceplate. Obviously, I wasn't going to be leaving it white. So I mixed some Griffhound Orange and Magmadroth Flame to make a beautiful warm orange colour. To get that iconic Denji and Pochita transfusion he's got going on. And again, I'm not a sculptor, so I opted to, rather than trying to sculpt some grooves in the faceplate, I just painted them on with a little bit of black paint, just taking my time, basing them out nicely. And paint using the reference art that we had showed earlier to just try and paint the grills or the exhaust ports essentially on his face. And then finally I just highlighted the faceplate again with, I think it was like Fire Dragon Bright, just a bright orange. And that was the painting done, so it was onto the base. I wanted a concrete jungle just like the reference art, so I printed these bits from Epic Basing. They're not a sponsor, I just like what they do. And then I asked my good friend Pete the Wargamer what they use to stick stuff to the bases. They recommended superfine milliput. So obviously I've used normal milliput, but this superfine stuff it's like blue tack when it's soft, which is actually really, really good for like applying a thick layer onto the base and then pressing the parts into the base to hold them and also arrange them really nicely. Again, it's just like sticking it with blue tack. It's really good. And then it dries solid. So I used a couple of parts. I chopped some where I needed to arrange them and tried to think about where he would stand on the base. And then once I arranged it, I started pressing in some other rocks, some bits of slate, some bits of cork and stuff, just to add some detail because we don't want it to look like blue tack when we're done. I also used a little bit of milliput to create some little platforms for the feet to sit. And then I used some pumice, so this is Vallejo white pumice, which is basically like a texture paint, to paint over all of the milliput to give it texture, to make it look like rubble. So I zenithal primed it, and then I just washed it all over, and I just painted it like concrete. So it sounds daft, but essentially use black to recess all the edges. And then if you look at like concrete, it's always covered in dirt and grime. So I used a mixture of Croak Green and Mortarian Grime to just add some streaks, add some dirt, add some grime to make it look nasty. I then painted the rebar metallic and then added some rust effects and typhus corrosion. Again, paint by numbers at this point. But then what I did do is I took some Xandri dust on an old brush and flicked it onto the concrete, because concrete always has like weird yellow dots on it. I don't know what it is. It's probably some like deposits of something. But I just flicked it all over and that really brought it to life. So then I super glued into the base and he looks mint. Let's go, boys. This is sick. So then it's time for blood. So blood for the blood god is going to be your friend here. Obviously, it's a servant of Khorne, and it's just a great colour. But you can also use Tamiya Clear, the X27, which is what I used before this product was available. So I'm taking a scraggly old brush and dabbing it onto the model. Because of the scraggly end, it's going to like put some random patterns on, which is what you want. It's supposed to represent blood splatter. It's not going to be uniform. So I'm just putting this all over like the hands where the chainsaws are, obviously on the chainsaw on his face, around where the blood should fall, like on his kneecaps, on his feet, on the floor, etc. I'm just putting it everywhere, but really his back, because that's not where it's going to be. Then I'm taking the same colour and adding some black ink and then putting this into the deeper recesses. This is to give it some variation. Again, contrast is king when you're trying to paint something to make it look good and make it look realistic. So I'm putting this into the recesses. It's going to represent guts and stuff like that. And dried blood. Dried blood goes black. I then took that same colour with an old toothbrush and flicked it all over the model. Again, it's just blood splatter. It's going to look mint. Trust the process. It's over the top, but it's okay. And then finally, you've probably seen this trick before. But if you take blood for the blood god, or X27 and mix it with Uhu glue, you can make a stringy mess which you can drag over the model. I've also added a little bit of sand to the mix, and this is to give it some grit, to give it some bits, to chunks, you know. You've got to make it look gross and grotty and grimy and horrible because this is gore. And then it's a case of focusing where the weapons are and stuff and dragging it between. This is goopy. It's like slime, honestly. So drag it between places, make it stick, and you're gonna have guts and gore and gross stuff just dragged over the model, just dangling from the chainsaw, dangling from his face. It's gonna look mint. Just drag it from 2 connecting points, like from the hand to the base, for example, or even just strung across the base for some detail. It's just gonna look like intestines or grime or whatever. It just looks. I just love this. It's so much fun. So once you've done that, if you followed along, you're left with something that looks a little bit like this. So there he is, Denji in 40k as a world eater. I love it when I can like have a cool palette cleanser and do something a little bit different. And this is like a really fun project. So hopefully you enjoyed the journey, and hopefully you can use some of these techniques I've used today on your own miniatures. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this or learned anything, then do like the video. And if you want to support me further, you can become a member, just like these wonderful people here. Thank you to Ted66, Joshua Rainbird, Living Dead Girl 40k, Paul Fisher, Dean Berriton, Jake's 2 pence, Ryan Meehan, Pete the Wargamer, Javin, JCMS Metamunday, Conga Stewie, Keith Moore, Justice Standers, Lambo Paints, Tom Warden, Patrick Barron, Jen Quarters, and Andrew Ibbotson. Thank you for being my most recent members, and thank you to all of my current members. Becoming a member is the best way to support me and the channel if you enjoy what I do, so thank you to everyone that has become a member, and if you consider it, thank you as well. I'll leave a link to everything that I use in the description, but otherwise, have a great day. Thanks, guys. Bye!